I'm Angelique Roche, and I am so excited because I get to host an amazing panel today about Marvel's 616. As the panel description alludes to, Marvel's 616 anthology of documentaries is such an amazing collection of episodes that are helmed by unique and all different filmmakers exploring the intersections of storytelling, pop culture, and fandom in the Marvel universe. A universe that spans 80 years and thousands of characters, and the creatives who had a little hand here and there throughout the years bringing these characters to life. Today, I am joined by some incredible masterminds who both produced and directed throughout the entire series. And I'll start from what is my top, which I am sure is going to be completely different on your screen. Gillian Jacobs, who is a director, Paul Scheer, who is a director, Sarah Amos, executive producer, and Jason Sturman, executive producer. And before we get into the nitty-gritty of the show and the episodes and maybe some surprise clips, I want to give each of you an opportunity to introduce yourself, and we can start with Gillian.
Hi, yes, I'm Gillian. I directed one of the episodes. I'm also an actor, and I came to this series knowing nothing about comics. I don't think I'd ever actually read a comic all the way through, so this was a really exciting process for me of getting to learn a lot about Marvel and falling in love with comics.
I love it. Paul.
Hi, I'm Paul Scheer. You might know me from shows like The League or Black Monday or my podcasts like How Did This Get Made or Unspooled, but I also am a writer for Marvel. I've written a handful of Marvel comic books in the past, and I love that world, and being able to actually be there and interact with the characters by writing them has been one of the best experiences of my life. And so when I got to talk to Disney Plus and Supper Club about doing a documentary about Marvel, it was really this amazing opportunity to dive deeper into this world, this 80-year world that I never really had a chance to do before. So that was what kind of brought me into this.
Awesome. Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Amos. I am our VP of Development and Production for New Media. So we're the team that works on all of the digital content you might know us from, our podcast, but also we helm a lot of the nonfiction projects. Hero Project, which is the Disney Plus show, and now 616. So we're very excited to kind of be taking these first steps into nonfiction content for the Marvel brand.
And Jason.
Hey, Jason Sturman. I'm an executive producer of the show, along with my partners David Gelb and Brian McGinn, who collectively we make up Supper Club. And it's just been an amazing opportunity to make this show, especially with these amazing people.
Awesome. So Marvel's 616 is produced, as you've both alluded to, by Marvel New Media and Supper Club. So I want to get us kicked off and hand it over to our two executive producers who are on the panel. Can you give us a little insight about what Marvel's 616 is and how the show came about and what fans can expect? And we'll start with Sarah.
Yeah, I think if you look at the last 80 years of Marvel, an Iron Man story feels very different than a Jessica Jones story or a Howard the Duck story, right? All of our characters have their own tone and their own vibe. So when we started tackling nonfiction at Marvel and we started looking back and wanting to tell our own stories, we wanted to make sure that we honored that same kind of tradition. So the anthology nature of the series really made sense to us because it allowed us to really respect each story, each storyteller, and let that journey be its own kind of moment. And then the next episode is going to take you on a completely different path. 80 years is a lot of history, and a lot of it actually even looks at where we're going in the future. So we wanted to make sure that there were going to be a lot of surprises along the way.
Love it. And Jason, I'm going to toss it over to you. And also, if you can kind of explain for folks who are watching at home right now, we keep saying anthology. Like, what does that mean for this show?
The idea of the anthology aspect, especially for this show, is really using each episode as a way of telling a singular story. So in the best way, each of these episodes kind of acts as its own individual film. And the thing that we wanted to do was we really wanted to bring in filmmakers who had a unique voice and a unique vision and let them actually play within this universe by finding stories that they were impassioned about, something that piqued their interest, something that they wanted to explore and discover more of. And we really did not box anyone in of trying to find a way of like, you have to tell the story this way. And so that, in a sense, leads directly into the anthology aspect of being utilized in the best way by each episode being its own journey through this Marvel universe. And you're going to discover an awful lot of things along the way, but also each one is being directed by a filmmaker who's bringing something to it that is, different. So there will be multiple entry points within this series, and every single episode, whether it's the genre, the theme, the tone, the execution, all of them are different. So there's going to definitely be a little something for everyone.
I love it. And I think one of the things that has been discussed before in regards, as we were kind of chatting before the panel started, is that every single one of the filmmakers were passionate about this. It was something that they were passionate about, that they felt like they were coming to the table really like with all of their energy and might to tell a story. Sarah, can you talk to us a little bit about what stands out in that process and why that was so important?
Yeah, look, I think it's fitting that one of the first places we're talking about this is a San Diego Comic-Con panel, because as we were developing this series, it's definitely like a San Diego crowd at times that we had in mind. We have a lot of fans that know our history, right? They know our characters. They've paid attention. They've read every Stan soapbox that's ever been made. And we wanted to give them some surprises. But at the same time, we wanted to also put together some pieces that a casual Marvel fan was really going to fall in love with and take something away from. So as we started developing it, the best part about working with directors like Paul and Gillian and our other team of directors was that each of them brought their own spin to a story and their own thing that they latched onto. And for some, it's going to be laugh out loud, funny throughout the whole thing. For others, you're going to be crying within minutes, right? Each one is its own kind of journey. And the development process and producing these was the same thing. I learned things along the way. Some of our executives who've been with the company for 30 years found out stories they had never heard. And we see a new future of Marvel in a lot of the characters that we meet, and we kind of see where we as a company are going. So all of that process and that journey was really, really exciting.
I actually think that's a really great segue to our first clip, which is Gillian's episode, Higher, Further, Faster, Trailblazing Women of Marvel Comics. And it's really cool. I love this episode. No spoilers, I promise, besides the teaser we're going to show. But it really takes a moment to shine the light on the trailblazing women within Marvel Comics, not just the characters, but the actual creatives and creators, and how they found a way to tell stories of representation and inclusion throughout Marvel's history. So let's take a second and see that clip.
We saw this really great spike in excitement and love and passion with Captain Marvel. And it really sort of inspired us to do more, because we knew there's a fan community out there that's activated. We can create more content for them. Captain Marvel was sort of that signpost of change. I had a conversation with my old boss. We were talking a lot about my childhood and talking about sort of the experiences I had, how I went to prom in like a piece of cloth I had wrapped around myself because I couldn't find any clothing that was appropriate for a young Muslim woman to wear to prom. Prom, which by the way I went by myself because I was not allowed to date. And running, like doing track while I was fasting, and he was just really interested in like the fact that like I lived such a distinct experience that not many people really talked about. And he walked in and he's like, I was really thinking a lot about, your stories, and it would be great if we had like a character that was based on, on you, based on like the young Sunnas of the world. And I was like, are we allowed to do this? Like this is the concept. I didn't think anyone would be interested. And he was like, let's do it. went straight into pitch mode. And the first person that I thought of was Willow Wilson, who was a comic book writer and a novelist and a Muslim.
She called me out of the blue and she said to me, hey, we want to create a new young American Muslim superheroine and put her on her own ongoing series. Do you want to write this book and help develop this character? And I was pretty convinced that they were joking because I said, there's no way that you ran that past, Marvel Comics. So they said, yes. How often does that happen? I didn't say yes right away. To be called up by 2 editors at Marvel and told, yes, we want to put a Muslim editor and a Muslim writer on a book about a Muslim character. I was like, you're going to have to hire an intern just to open all this hate mail. You're gonna, it just seemed like waving a red flag in front of all of the people who thought that people like me and Sana should not be in comics at all. But Sana was so driven about this series. She was so prepared to usher it through, to make sure that it was done right, to oversee all the nitty-gritty, to run interference if necessary, that I was just kind of swept along. I was like, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're this committed, I'm this committed. Let's do it.
Oh my gosh. So I've seen it, so I'm not going to say anything else. But that clip was just such a great taste of this amazing episode. Gillian, can you talk a little bit about how you got attached to this particular episode, as we've been talking about passion and bringing things to the table? And, what was the process of directing it? Because it seems like a pretty big swath of history that you took on.
I inadvertently made a piece about the history of comics, not just Marvel, which I did not think I was doing going in. But, I think the viewer's journey and my journey as a director might be a little bit parallel in that for a more casual fan of Marvel who doesn't know a lot about the history of it, and for me as a person who didn't know anything about the history of it, it was really exciting to discover not just the names that I think Marvel fans know of, like Marie Severin, who's a really important artist there, but a whole host of other women who worked at Marvel over the decades. And then also talking about the really exciting women who are currently working there. And so I got to fall in love with Marvel Comics, the characters they've created, the books they've worked on. And it was really fun. And I've never read so many comics in my life.
So where do you just alluded to it. There's a very long history of Marvel. Where do you start? How do you decide what to focus on here?
Well, I had to go back to why is the comic book industry look the way it looks right now? I mean, I had to go back to the 20s, the 30s. I mean, there's so much in terms of things that happen in the comic book industry, and then how that affected companies like Marvel. And so for me, I was watching clips of congressional hearings. I mean, the process of this documentary took me in a lot of different directions. But I was, excited to find women these won't be discoveries for Marvel fans, but for me, I didn't know about Louise Simonson and Nocenti, and they are very famous people within the world of comics. But for me, I didn't know anything about them. So I got to learn about them, and I got to then meet a lot of these people, which was very exciting.
So I know this is going to be hard just based on your reaction to my last question. Yes. Do you have any favorite moments from filming and putting together this episode?
Maybe it was sort of getting some women in the same room who had worked together really closely a couple decades previously, but haven't necessarily gotten to spend a lot of time together. And just being able to film them interacting. That was a really special moment. I got to film in the Marvel offices, which I didn't know put me in a very small group of people who've been allowed to film in the Marvel offices. So that was very exciting. And, and then, like I said, just getting to meet not just the women who, worked there in previous decades, but the women who are working there now. It was all exciting to me. Like, I got so into it that I was starstruck.
All right. So Jason, Sarah, you have been very hands-on with this production from day one. For you, was there anything in this episode that you feel stuck out that's your favorite moment? Because I feel like you've probably seen this episode enough times at this point that you know exactly like what you love about this particular piece.
I think that for me, at least, jumping in, one of the rewarding things I do really think is having the opportunity of producing this while Gillian's directing it. There's an aspect of discovery, even from our standpoint. The thing that Gillian's amazing at is really doing deep dive research and really coming to the table with a full set of facts. And when she sits down with any of the women who you see in this episode, you really see them have an opportunity to, express their feelings about the history in general of comics, their interaction with it, but also seeing the progression of how things have changed over the course of time. And for me, one of the most rewarding things was, I think, when Gillian was able to spend time and sit with people like Sana Amanat, and you look at, especially in that clip that we just saw, you look at the history of Marvel Comics to be able to get to a point where Ms. Marvel is as popular of a character as she is, and when you look at what was done by, Sana and G. Willow to be able to make that a possibility, I think the thing that Gillian did an amazing job is like really showing how the timeline of both comics and history allowed for that to be what is going to be the jumping off point and, where people follow from here as well.
My favorite thing about the film is the accessibility of it. So I have a little girl at home and I spend a lot of time teaching her about comics, but I also have a lot of conversations with people where they feel terrified, right? At the idea of where you even begin with Marvel. There's so many people are experts. So many people have this fear of, oh, well, can I even really get into this? So getting to watch the moments in this film where it is so accessible and it shows how anyone can be inspired by our characters, that anyone can create a character that really reflects them and then show the lasting impact that character can have in society. And then honestly, getting to watch Gillian start from a standpoint of not knowing our characters to now being more of an expert than some of the folks I work with. Like that journey in itself is what the film is really all about. The fact that, Marvel can be for anyone, both from an audience perspective, but also from a standpoint of the creative we are trying to push forward. We want to create characters that truly reflect everyone out there. And I think this film really encapsulates that in a really beautiful way.
So, Paul, I know you haven't seen it, but you are a comic book fan.
Yes.
How excited are you to see it now?
No, we actually worked very closely together in proximity, not on the same project. So, I got to hear from the editors and everyone involved kind of some of the great interviews that were gotten in that doc. And so I'm incredibly excited to see it. I've heard a lot about everyone's doc, and I think what makes it really fun is they're completely different. And as a Marvel fan, it's going to scratch an itch that you probably didn't even know you had. But really, they're just documentary films about really interesting subjects. And so there are things here that I've heard, and I don't want to spoil anything. I want to keep the cone of secrecy. But that I heard that I'm like, oh, wow, I didn't even know that. And a lot of times, you hear things offhandedly, but they haven't really been put on record. You haven't had somebody across from you be able to verify that actually did happen or that didn't happen. So I think that that's really kind of a great thing to have now, this real history of the women behind the scenes and in front of the scenes at Marvel that really created these books that have had a giant influence. I mean, the X-Men is such a book that's influenced by, Louise Simonson. It's like, but yet you don't hear her name as often as you hear other male creators. So I think those little details are things that I really took to when I heard about Gillian's doc.
So that's interesting because, Paul, you hit on the perfect segue for me. Thank you. Which is this idea that there's just such a breadth, like it's such a wide field of things to talk about and characters. and it's not even talking about volumes or specific histories or specific creators. Sarah and Jason, where does one start on, saying, okay, these are the ones we're going to do? Because I feel like there could be 40, 50 of these, of just looking at what the Marvel universe has within it's just the comics, right? How did you come upon this, besides obviously passionate directors that we have already discussed, but like the actual subject matter?
So we locked Supper Club in a room for several weeks with everyone who works at Marvel, and then just made them listen to every story. Not in any way, shape, or form how we did it. Jason, you take it. Sorry.
I mean, I think the thing that we challenged ourselves with internally before we ever, approached anyone about making any of them was looking at the subject matter and going, what's the expected version of this show? If someone were to just write the log line and go, this is what Marvel 616 is, and then how do we make sure that it's not that? And I think what that ultimately leads to is that you end up having the ability to have episodes that really are a revelation moment, or just it's something that the average audience is not going to be able to look at and go, oh, I know what that is. And I think that we continually strive to do that. Every single time that we made an episode that we were in development on, we would talk to a filmmaker. We would kind of have a conversation of either, look, like Gillian and Paul are great examples of that. Like Gillian came into and goes, I'm intrigued by the subject matter and the opportunity to tell a story within this space. Something that Gillian's very passionate about is uncovering the history and the stories of women in the workplace and how those things have evolved over the course of time. So it's then taking that and going, okay, that's an interesting subject matter and a kernel. How do we then make that into something that fits in the Marvel universe? Well, we looked at the timeline, the history, and we built the episode around, the idea of these female Marvel creators over the course of time. Paul has such a wealth of knowledge when it comes to Marvel comics. He's read them his entire life. He's written for Marvel. So it doesn't require the same thing of Paul, let me introduce you to Marvel. Instead, it's Paul had an idea that he wanted to come in with and go, how do we tell this in the documentary form? And very different than Gillian's, really the thing we did with Paul was, okay, how do we use what you want to tell and find a new way to execute that and have it be presented in a different way, which you'll see the two episodes are entirely different from the way that they're presented.
Well, I think that is a perfect opportunity to show the clip from Paul's episode Lost and Found. You're right. It is completely different from Gillian's episode. We actually kind of go, the audience is taken along a journey with Paul, who is on a hunt to find some forgotten Marvel comics and characters, and to reintroduce audiences to a collection of, some would say, obscure, wild, and bizarre cast of characters. So we should go ahead and play that clip.
I think what's kind of fascinating about you is you take this character of Black Panther at a time when Black Panther, for lack of a better term, it's like a B-list character when you take it over, and you kind of imbue it with all this energy. Was it daunting?
I knew what the opportunity was with Black Panther if I did it right. And I said, I'm gonna write the comic book equivalent of a Public Enemy record. A completely uncompromised, politically provocative book. And that was the key to success. Suddenly, we're selling huge numbers. I mean, more comics than when Stan and Jack was writing the book.
Do you remember any of those books that you read? They didn't maybe catch on, or they were a little ahead of their time or anything like that?
There was a character named Dr. Druid. He shows up in an Avengers issue on the cover. He's fighting crime in a bathrobe. He was like a pre-Lebowski. And I go, here's a man of leisure, a magic user. I'm immediately interested.
Yeah.
What's his origin? How did this happen? Yeah. Well, his origin was he just kind of bumped into the same guy that made Doctor Strange, the Ancient One, and he gave him some magic powers to go away. And I was like, wait, why are we having Bargain Basement Sorcerer Supreme now? There's a character called the Wizard. The Wizard can run so fast that he can make little tornadoes.
Okay.
So he will do some stuff really fast, and then people are sort of sucked up.
So almost like a Tasmanian devil-esque.
Yes. His origin was that he was injected with or injected himself with mongoose blood.
What was in the mongoose blood? Is it like radioactive mongoose
I don't know.
blood?
Are mongooses like known for being fast?
I mean, even if they are, you wouldn't just get the power of a mongoose through the blood.
You ever heard of the bad guy Typeface?
It's like a typeface, like a printing typeface?
Type on his face.
No.
He's this guy who worked for this sign making company.
Okay.
And then a new guy comes in and buys his building and fires him.
Okay.
And now he's a supervillain. I swear to God, that's
A sign-making supervillain?
he has letters that he like took off of the sign attached all over his body, and he writes in perfect like signage painting. He puts an R on his forehead that is for revenge. And then he just throws these letters like.
I love that clip because you're getting to see the passion that each of the creators that I talked to in that moment have for characters that exist in the world of Marvel. I kind of think of Marvel, think of it like a family reunion, right? We all know the major players, but then there's that weird uncle that you only see like once every 4 years. Like, what is up with him? Does he own a bait and tackle shop? I need to find out. I want to sit next to that person. And I feel like everybody who I think has worked at Marvel has tried to fit in something. When I did Cosmic Ghost Rider, we went back through the history of Marvel and tried to find these stories that you might not have been totally familiar with, but yet you knew existed. So we were able to tell stories in the Fantastic Four, or tell, stories that happened in the beginning of Captain America. And we really got to play around in this pond of like pulling up characters that were at one point very, very popular. And I think they all hold a place in all of our hearts. I think a reader, like whenever you started reading, if it was at 9 or 10 or 20 or whenever, you're like, oh, I love that character. That was my entry character, or whatever happened to that book. And now when we have a chance to, I don't know, have a little bit more power, we can say to Marvel, like when I've written books, like, can we bring that character back? Can we do that? And they're like, oh yeah, you could, it's like, it's the best part. Marvel Comics is great because you don't have to like get actors back. They never age. They never get, so you can kind of pull them back in. So for me, it was sort of saying like, yes, we know all these amazing characters that Marvel has in the front of their team ups, that we know the front line. We even know like the reserves. I'm talking about the people who are behind the scenes a little bit more. I want to get into the world of like Damage Control, or like we talked there about the Wizard, or a superhero who has a CB radio installed in his brain. Like, these are the characters that we need to uncover. Every week on the World's Greatest Book Club that I've been doing with Steve Wacker, we kind of pull out these old ones. It's like we get to see comics that are around like musicians and stuff like that, like Eminem and the Punisher teaming up in the Marvel world. Like, okay, let's get into it. So that really is what I was trying to tap into, is finding these connections that we have to these characters that are maybe didn't get a chance to shine as brightly as they could have.
I get it. One of my favorite Marvel characters was Ace back in the 80s. Had a motorcycle. Kind of looked like an 80s rock star. Not really sure what his powers were. Kind of had some Spidey things. Absolutely get it. Very obscure. Own both the comics. And it's this proverbial Pandora box of characters, right?
Asbestos woman. A woman who worked in an asbestos plant. And now she has the powers of asbestos. Like, let's get into that character. What's going on with her?
Where is
she now? Where is she now?
Is that real?
That is real.
Yes.
It's asbestos.
It is real.
To be exact.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate that. Someone was correcting us. But now I kind of had to talk about, like, do you have any favorite standouts that you could tell us? Because obviously no spoilers. There's another 40 minutes of the show that you can't spoil.
Well, I will say that finding Typeface is great. A character that we didn't get to explore that I really wanted to get into was Hell Cow, a cow who is bitten by a vampire, and he's a vampire cow. Like, there are stories here to tell about Hell Cow. Typeface, a guy who gets out, basically his small business is closed, and now he uses the typeface on his face to take revenge. I alluded to US 1, who is our CB truck driving, goes into outer space with his big rig. I mean, there's stories here, characters that never really took off. Hell Cow is pretty great.
I also think like that clip is a perfect example of how, no matter what you think you already know about the Marvel comic universe. I mean, Paul's reaction alone to when Jerry Duggan and Donny Cates are talking about those characters are authentic. Like there are so many of these things that just continue to pop up that we continue to find. That it's just like no one had any idea that these existed, yet they are a part of this universe.
And, to Jason's point, what I'll say is, and I think that clip starts off with Reggie Hudlin, who I think really redefined Black Panther, brought Black Panther into a whole new world. And that character, when he took it over, was this C-list character. It was a character who was kind of a little bit on the forgotten pile. And what I love about that is, it's the person behind that character that can really raise it up. And I think that you find the right person to pair with the right character and you get this whole nother thing. Deadpool's a perfect example of that. There is a version of Deadpool that, is definitely a little bit more ultra violent and does stuff. And then there's a version of Deadpool that's incredibly funny that Jerry Duggan did with Brian Posehn that, kind of invigorates the characters in different ways. I never enjoyed Thor before Jason Aaron wrote Thor, but that like he was my entry point to it. And then, I found these connections. It's sort of like finding your writers.
So Sarah, Jason, clearly being hands-on as you are, there were probably a lot of other forgotten characters that were discussed. I am sure that even the episode, when folks see it, will not have all of the myriad of treasures that reside within the Marvel universe's forgotten characters. Are there any characters that stood out to you or any moments that stood out to you in doing this production?
So I will say, listening to Paul talk about this episode is exactly the most memorable part of this episode. Because he is so deeply excited and passionate about every character, no matter how obscure. And in fact, the more obscure, the more passionate he became about them, was by far like the biggest joy. I think being able to just pitch some of these to executives at Marvel who had worked there a long time, and even some of them hadn't remembered who these characters are. Steve Wacker brought some really, really good names to the table. There's a poet character that I'm not going to go into because I don't want to spoil it, but it's so special. So I think no big deal, just a little beat poetry. Just being able to say like, hey, look what Paul found today, and just get blank stares from executives was the best because it was so confusing and amazing and wonderful.
But I think going back to what I was saying, I think every Marvel fan has that thing, and it's kind of going back to your childhood. It's like the way that you talk about your favorite TV shows. It's like, yeah, I think he lived in a house and there was like a train in it. Oh, you remember that? Yeah, I do remember that. It's like, it's sort of like you need someone else to bounce it off of to know that it exists. And one of the best things that we have access to is we have the files. We can pull it up and be like, I think there is a character that is like this. And then you can see the panels and you can read it. And, through Marvel Unlimited, you kind of have access to all these people that have popped up once or twice. And it's absolutely such a fun way to explore this landscape. And I think it's a great way to celebrate this 80-year history of Marvel, because it is more than the Spider-Mans and the Iron Man and it's, and all these characters that we love. It's also the missteps, and they're not missteps. They're just the ones that didn't connect. To me, like my ultimate dream, I want to do a Damage Control series. I want to find the superheroes who are the workers who have to rebuild the city. Like I've been begging Marvel. I'm like, please let me make this. Let me do a short run of Damage Control. I just like the guys that have to punch the clock. Like, yeah, I'm not good enough to be a superhero, but I can rebuild this building. I can suck out all the asbestos again or whatever.
I think it's such proof that it's exactly what Paul's about, like the 80 years, right? Because a lot of these characters, they started in like weird pop culture moments, or like you can see like, oh, so that's definitely when that was in fashion. And so it's fun to get to trace a lineage of weird characters and see how much Marvel was influenced by what was going on at the time, for better and for worse in certain moments.
Well, look, I mean, we can't look, when you're talking about Marvel superheroes, you got to be like Iron Man, Spider-Man, Billy Ray Cyrus. Billy Ray Cyrus, one of the best Marvel characters.
Done.
Time traveling knight from the past, also modern day rock musician. Like, yes, why, when is Billy Ray Cyrus going to join the MCU? Come on. He should be part of at least the Great Lakes Avengers. Get him in there.
I've heard of the Great Lake Avengers.
Jason, I'm gonna toss it over to you because we're gonna spiral into forgotten characters if I don't. You look like you had something to add.
The most obscure character that I found during the process of making this actually leads into the three-dimensional chess that Paul is playing with the Marvel Universe, because the most obscure character in the Marvel comic universe is Paul Scheer, who's in
yes. I am in the Marvel Universe. I date Scott Lang, or I'm flirting with Scott Lang's daughter in Astonishing Ant-Man #4, written by Nick Spencer. Yes, I've memorized. I show up to a basketball game, and I got Scott Lang upset. So honestly, that character's got to come back. I mean, seriously, it's right there. What do I become? A hero, Dr. Doom? Either way, let's pull it all together.
You are the most pure character.
We'll work it out. I feel like we've only given Gillian 2,500 more comics to go read. This entire panel. And I wish we had another hour, 2 hours to sit here and talk, because I know we could, just about forgotten characters. But I do kind of want to officially kind of bring this to a close, because there are a total of 8 episodes. So this is literally just the tip of the iceberg on the amazing stories that have been put together for Marvel 616. And so I'd love to kind of toss it back to Jason and Sarah for some final words on what your thoughts are, what you're excited about fans to see with the other 6 episodes we hadn't even had a chance to talk about yet. Sarah?
Okay. I mean, there's so much. Look, I think I'm really excited to get to talk about this first off in like a public way. It's just fun to get to hang out with this wonderful group of people that I've been working with on this for a very long time. I'm excited to introduce different communities to people, I think is the thing that's really great, right? Like fandom has so many different ways to be experienced, whether it's cosplay or love of a specific character or love of the character of Paul Scheer. There's so many different ways that you can really kind of connect with Marvel. And I'm just excited to put 8 episodes out there and then start to talk to people to figure out which one connected with everyone, right? Because in a lot of ways with this series, similar to that first comic you read that really grabs you, this series is going to do the same thing. And I'm just excited to watch people learn a bunch of really cool stuff about Marvel and cry a little bit and feel inspired and feel like they should go read more comics and
get that Marvel Unlimited app. Get that Marvel Unlimited app.
That really, I mean, for me, and for anyone who is new to reading comics, the ability to go on there and read an entire run of a comic, just click on a creator's name and find other things that they worked on. It was really fun for me. Not just the research I had done online, but just finding it by just reading a bunch of different titles that people worked on. I love comics.
We're going to make everyone love comics as much as Gillian now loves comics with this series.
Jason.
I think the thing that I'm most excited about is, the power of documentary has always been the ability to both educate and expand people's minds. But the thing we've always really tried to do is really lean into the idea of it being entertainment as well. And so nothing feels like it's a chore or that, it's just leaning purely into the education aspect. And the thing that I've been so surprised with in every single one of these episodes is you can walk from one edit room to the next as these things are being made, and you'll hysterically hysterically laugh in one and, bawl your eyes out in the next. And I'm excited for audiences to ultimately, like Sarah said, find their entry point, which one people are going to gravitate towards. I think the idea really is that, this does not become a series where what the next thing will be when you click play on episode to episode. And I also think that people have an idea of what they think, Marvel Comics are and what this series may be, and they're going to be very, very surprised when they see this come to life.
Jason said it so perfectly. I think a lot of people have an idea of what Marvel fandom looks like, or Marvel fans look like, or what the people behind the comics look like. And the thing that I love so much about the series is we're going to introduce you to so many different types of faces and different types of people who have been so integral to the stories we tell and the content we create, and haven't all necessarily had a moment in the spotlight. And Gillian's doc does that amazingly, but honestly, it just scratches the surface of where we go. Marvel really does have characters and creators that speak to every walk of life. And I do think this series really highlights that in a unique way that we haven't been able to do in the past. And I'm very, very excited for hopefully a lot of people to watch at home and see themselves reflected in the people up on screen.
And I just want to say one thing, working on this has been a really exciting experience. I have never directed documentary before, right? And I think what Supper Club brings to the table, and something that I think when you're watching the show, you'll see, is there's an artistry in how these shows look. They're beautiful. They span, sometimes, they're going across the country, sometimes they're going across the world, and it's beautiful to look at. So it's really, the production value of these are gorgeous. And I think that they do such a great job at helping filmmakers, people who have directed, I've directed things, but I never did a doc before, help get your voice out there. And so just by virtue of having non-documentary filmmakers have their first foray be here has been really cool. And I think that allows for a lot of different voices. And to work with Marvel and Sarah, there is this belief in what you are passionate about. And it's not trying to fill out, we need to have X, Y, and Z covered in this. It really is follow the passion of the person. So this is a show that could go on for hundreds of episodes simply because no one person has the same thing that they're interested in that world. Even if you did 5 documentaries on Spider-Man, they could be from very different perspectives. And that's what I feel like Marvel has really allowed us to do, which is say, your perspective is the most important. You don't have to figure out some company-wide thing. And then Supper Club coming in going, we're going to make this look amazing, and we're going to give you the tools to tell this story. So it really, as a filmmaker or as a creator, it's really amazing to work with that. And, especially with this world as vast as it is.
I love it. And you know what? That is a perfect way to hand it over to Gillian for her, everyone's got a closing statement. So Gillian.
I have a closing statement?
Pressure's on.
It makes me sad that I didn't read comics as a kid, because it is a unique joy that you get from reading comics. And so now I got to experience that as an adult. And I'm so excited for people to see both, people that are very legendary within the world of Marvel Comics and maybe people they don't know as much about. And thank you so much to Sarah, to Marvel, to Jason, Supper Club for giving me the opportunity.
Awesome.
And thank you, Comic-Con audience. Let's take some questions from the Comic-Con audience. Where's the Comic-Con audience?
You're just going to steal my joy. It's fine, Paul. I get it. No, but thank you to the audience and everyone that's watching at home. And thank you to the entire panel. This has been an absolute joy. Thank you, Paul, Sarah, Jason, Gillian. And, if you have any questions, go at Marvel. Send them. We want to know exactly what your thoughts are, what you're excited about.
Or just shout them at your computer right now. We won't answer you, but that's like a real Comic-Con. The limited amount of people who actually get their questions answered at Comic-Con very small.
One more plug to Disney Plus. Marvel 616 on Disney Plus.
8 episodes.
Go get Disney Plus.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Hi there, it's Debbie. Did you know that in the 90s, Michael Jackson actually tried to buy Marvel Comics just so he could play Spider-Man? It might sound like a weird idea, but Stan Lee later admitted that he thought he would have been very good for the part. Who knows how that would have turned out? Remember to click below to subscribe, remember to tap the notification bell, or click on the side for more great content.